Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever time you're listening in. This is a Contagious Smile, and I am Victoria. I am honored to have Miss Charlene with us this morning. She is a warrior, to say the least. It is my honor to have you. She is a survivor of the most horrific events, and my hat goes off to her. She's a fellow survivor of domestic violence. She is a healer. She is amazing, and I just can't wait for you guys to get inspired by her story. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. So let's start, I guess, at the beginning. Tell me about your childhood.
Yeah, my childhood was not the best childhood, to say the least. My story really begins at the age of 3.5. I was born into a pretty dysfunctional family. My father was a severe alcoholic, and he tended to be violent when he drank. And unfortunately, most of the times the violence was directed at my half brothers because they weren't biologically his. So they were unfortunately easy targets for him. So when I was 3.5, my mom made a choice to leave the marriage, and she wanted to take, of course, all the kids and go, but my dad wouldn't let her take my sister and I. So she was faced with a really difficult decision. Does she take the two sons that are being abused and remove them from the home, or does she stay with all four of her kids? And she made a tough decision, and she left the home and took my brothers, and it probably in hindsight saved their lives. But she left my sister and I with my dad, who was an alcoholic. 2 weeks in, he realized that he was in way over his head. He was barely functioning. So looking after two little girls, 3.5 and 7, was not in his playbooks. So he contacted my grandparents and asked if they would take us in. And my grandmother never skipped a beat. She said, absolutely, we will take them. And she, to me, was my saint in my life. She was very strong. I always thought far ahead for her time, the time area she grew up in, because she believed women should get a good education, get a good career, and be independent and not depend on anyone else. And
Sounds like a very smart lady.
Yes, and I probably learned that lesson a little too well, I always said in my life. But as wonderful as my grandmother was, though, my grandfather was a pedophile. So at the age of 3.5, both my sister and I started experiencing sexualized trauma at his hands. And this went on almost weekly for 9 years. It took that long before the abuse finally came out. And I think I can only speak for myself. The silence was generated by this fear of losing the only family that I knew. As a child, not having any stability in my life and only having my grandmother as that person that I could depend on, I felt if the truth came out, that we would be removed from the home and I would lose my grandma, which was the sun in my world. So it created the silence that we lived by. But at 16, my sister started realizing that there was a really good chance she was going to become impregnated by my grandfather. And she went to school and basically had a nervous breakdown one day. She desperately wanted to run away. She wanted to leave the home, but she knew if she left, that meant that the abuse would be 100% directed towards me. And she wanted to protect me as much as she could as a big sister. So that was her way of protecting me, was finally having it come out. And you would think that things would get better, and they did in a way. Back in the early 80s when this happened, there wasn't a lot of follow-up care. Counseling and therapy was not a big thing back then. And of course, my grandmother being so strong and independent, her belief was we just put our head down and we get through life. And that's great in some aspects, but not when you're dealing with that kind of trauma. So I remember sitting with a social worker after everything came out, and just having her get up and pat me on the back and say, Charlene, I just want you to know that everything's going to be okay. And I'm like 12.5. So at this point in my young life, I have no idea what okay looks like. I don't feel like I've ever been okay. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I just believe that it means I'm supposed to just keep plugging through life. And that's what I, tried to do. I went into high school, and of course I was growing up in a smaller kind of urban or rural area. There's 2,500 people in the town I came from. So you couldn't really get away from the stigma because, people talk, and
Sure.
everybody seemed to know what had happened. So I went into high school dealing with this stigma, and it just kept building and building. And I started experiencing depression and mental health
Sure.
struggles, started to get suicidal, began cutting at an early age in high school as just an outlet to deal with the pain. Started drinking, smoking marijuana, anything I could do basically to numb the emotional pain that I was feeling is what I was doing. And I discovered writing, and it was a way of pouring my emotions out on paper and pen with pen. And I always said probably poured ink out onto paper rather than blood, because it usually was one of those two options. So doing that kind of writing, though, being very dark and depressing and suicidal, it caught the attention, of course, of my English teacher, who sent me off to the guidance counselor, who booked an appointment with the school psychologist. And I went through a whole afternoon assessment and questionnaires and, filling out forms and talking, which was really the last thing I wanted to do at that point.
Of course.
And at the end of the 4 hours, she says, "Charlene, I want you to know we're diagnosing you as manic depressive bipolar." And I'm sitting there at like 15 and a half going, okay, I don't know what that even means.
Right.
We're not talking about grabbing a cell phone and Googling, because that didn't exist. So I was
Right.
like, I'm not going to go pull books out of the school library on mental, illness. So I was just stuck with a label now that I felt I had placed on me, with no real understanding of what it meant, other than I thought it just meant I was crazy, because that's how I felt at the time. And again, we're talking mid 80s now. So it was we're here for you. If you need to talk, please book an appointment. We're available anytime. And really, again, last thing I wanted to do was talk.
Yeah.
So again, I did what my grandma taught me to do. I put my head down and just got through school. And as soon as I graduated, I moved away, because I felt internally that if I could leave where everything had happened and where everybody knew, that life would be better. I thought I could just escape all of that, but
Start over.
yeah, exactly. But it didn't matter, because wherever I went, there I was, because I was carrying the trauma with me. So I moved away with my high school sweetheart, and we decided we were going to have a family, start, rather young. I was 20 when I got pregnant, 21 when I had my first daughter. I had my next daughter 4 years later, so I was 25, and then I had my son at 27. And I think with each child, I hoped that a piece of me was going to be fixed. I so desperately wanted to break the cycle of generational trauma that, I didn't know that that's what it was called at the time, but I just wanted to fix what, yeah, I didn't want my kids to have the same life that I had had. I wanted better, which, all parents do. We want our children to have better. But the problem was I couldn't do better. I didn't have the coping mechanisms or the tools to do better. And so I just struggled. Alcohol was a huge influencer on my life, because I was still trying to numb these emotions that, I was trying to fight the demons, I guess, trying to keep them at bay so that I could just be a functioning parent.
Right.
But of course, drinking doesn't help you be a functioning parent. And when you're dealing with depression, it just makes it worse. And at 28, I remember, having a sit down with my husband and saying, I need to leave the house, because I had gotten so suicidal that I was planning on taking my own life. And I was trying to figure out how I could do it, because I knew my kids would probably be the ones that would find me, when they came home from school. And that thought terrified me.
Absolutely.
And I thought, okay, maybe we need to just take a break and get ourselves together, which is what I did. And at this point, I think my marriage had basically fallen apart. So my husband didn't bat an eye when I said I was leaving. And I left, and I thought, here we go, we're going to get better. But all it did was put me in a tailspin, because now I had the shame and the guilt of doing the exact same things that my parents did. I left my kids, and I let alcohol, affect my parenthood. And so as I'm tail spinning, I jump into another relationship because I'm just needing someone to validate me and love me and make me feel worthy, which I had never felt in my entire life.
Right.
And when they say like attracts like, they're 100% correct, because the partner I jumped in the relationship with was extremely toxic. He had just left a relationship. He had suffered childhood trauma, which gave him not very good coping skills. Was an alcoholic, did drugs, and he ended up getting violent when he drank. And so very quickly on in the relationship, I started experiencing domestic violence. And I think it fit the narrative that I felt at the time. I had so much guilt for leaving my kids that it was almost like I felt like that's what I deserved. Abuse had become such a normalized thing in my life that
That's all you knew.
it felt normal. It probably almost felt comfortable.
Because that's all you knew. That was your norm.
Exactly. So this went on for 2 years until there was a really bad evening, and he had left the apartment, and I was sitting there on the living room floor crying, going, I can't live like this. Who lives like this? And instead of, going, I'm leaving the relationship, I went, I'm leaving life. And I went to my medicine cabinet. I took all the pills out, and I took all the pills, all the pain medication, sleeping pills. And then I sat down on the couch with a pad of paper and a pen, like was my comfort zone. And I started to write my goodbye letters to my kids. And
had you stayed in contact with your kids over this period of time?
Absolutely. Yeah. I had like daily, I saw my kids basically every day. So, cause I worked nights, I was a bartender. So I would go spend the day with the kids and then work nights. So, and I will say
you were already different than your family because you went and made sure you spent time with your kids. So that makes it different. So kudos to you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And after I had left, because I was a very controlling person in the marriage, because I felt if I could control the narrative of the marriage, like if I controlled everything, I was the financially responsible one in the marriage and stuff. And I think it was the security that they would never leave if they needed me, if I was the dominant force. But the minute I left, it was just a ticket for my husband to just kind of go crazy and start living a life. And he actually turned to, he started having parties at the house all the time. And before I knew it, I was suspecting, and I ended up being correct, he was actually dealing drugs out of the house. Oh, so as dysfunctional as I felt that I was at the time in the household, actually leaving created more dysfunction for my kids at the time. But so there I am, I'm writing my goodbye letters to my kids. And as tough as it was the best thing I did in the moment, because I, trying to justify to 3 little kids why I'm leaving them forever. And it was just like, no, I can't do this. I can't leave. And I called a cab. I jumped in the cab, went to the emergency room, and was sitting at the admissions desk going, yeah, I think I'm overdosing on a bunch of pills. And I just collapsed. And when I woke up, I was laying in a hospital bed with tubes down my throat.
Pumping your stomach.
Yeah. And the partner who had abused me just hours prior, sitting in a chair beside me crying, saying how sorry he was. Mm-hmm. And so I get released from the hospital the next day after they make sure that I'm sane enough to be out on my own. And I get a call from my mom, who I had maintained contact with throughout my life. And my partner had called her and said, hey, I just want you to know, Charlene's in the hospital. So I'm talking to my mom, and my mom's like, Charlene, I think you need to make a change. You need to pack the kids up, move them out west, start over again. We'll help you get on your feet, create a great life and stuff. And, again, this fit my narrative of running and just geographically changing locations, thinking my life would change. So I made the decision to go. Left my partner behind, and off I went. Now, at the time, I was only able to take my 2 daughters. And again, I went, wow, we've just repeated the generation of, I'm faced with a decision of, saving the kids that I can, because at the time, my husband's lifestyle was getting worse and worse.
Right.
And, I could take two of the kids and go, or stay, and all the kids would stay with my husband, because the moment I left the house, gave him basically custody of the
Custody.
kids.
Correct.
So I had to face a choice of leaving my son and taking my two daughters. And I thought, wow, I've just repeated that pattern that my mom had to make. And I decided I would take the kids that I could and go and get them to safety. And so I did. I moved my two daughters across the country, and thought, life was going to be great. 6 months after I left, I received a call from my partner, who had said, hey, I just want you to know your husband's been arrested. His house was raided. Your son's been taken by Child Protective Services, and he's been placed in foster care.
No. And how old is
So
your son at this point?
he was 3 at the time.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was on a plane the next morning, within
Yeah.
8 hours, I was on a plane flying back across the country. I got back into where the area I was from, and Monday morning I was in court. And by Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I walked out of Child Protective Services with the custody of my son.
Good for you.
And yeah, and was able to bring him back across the country to
Good for you.
better life. And so that's what I did. I went back with my son, and a few months later, my partner contacted me and said, hey, I'm moving out west as well. And this was the abusive partner. And he said, I miss you. I realize I want to be with you. Life is going to be different. And of course,
Not
we
gonna
always
happen anymore.
we always suck right into that, because we want it so desperately to be true. It doesn't have to be real, but we want it to be true. And he moved out, and all that happened was it created a whole nother decade of domestic abuse, dysfunction, toxic relationship. And
Right.
I wanted it desperately to change, but I didn't have the strength or the confidence in myself to start creating that change. And it was actually him that ended the relationship. He came home on a Friday or Saturday and said, hey, I'm moving out today. And he moved out and moved directly in with another woman. And
They do that, don't they?
I know, it's crazy. And I, of course, was devastated, because I felt abandoned all over again. It just brought up all those issues of childhood abandonment that I had felt. But I thought, okay, now's our chance to get our life together. Let's start doing this. And had a great support network of girlfriends that were there, cheering me on. And I was on that path. And then, I remember on a Tuesday morning, getting a text from my ex-partner saying, hey, can we talk? And I was like, no, there's nothing to say. And he's like, I really want to see you and just chat. And I was like, no, because if I see you again, I know I'm going to go back to square one, right? Because I know I'm not strong enough yet. I'm going to get sucked back into that. And he's like, well, I just want you to know, or I just want to say I'm sorry. And I'm sorry for the way things ended. And I was like, you know what? Things ended the way they're supposed to, like they always do. And I said, you've moved on. I'm trying to move on. I wish you the best. And that was it. Yeah. I felt, so empowered that I had finally stood my ground. And then 2 days later, a police officer walks into my place of work and asks to see me outside. Now, this was an officer who I had been involved in a domestic dispute, so he knew where to find me. And he took me outside and said, Charlene, I just want you to know I came onto shift and I saw on the board, your ex-partner has committed suicide. And I was absolutely devastated. I felt crushed.
You had no sense of relief at all?
No, because I still, as messed up as it was, I still loved him. I didn't have any fear of him anymore.
Right.
Because I think once I had made that decision and took my own power back, and, I had a great support network again around me of people who had become aware of what was going on. So I knew it wasn't going to happen again. I didn't know it wasn't going to happen again. I knew if I got in a relationship, there was a chance it would happen again. But no, I felt at that moment, I felt a sense of grief. I mean, I had to go home and tell my kids, who he had raised for 13 and a half years, who basically was more of a father than their own father was, that he had taken his life. And I was dealing with my grief so much, and I was so in it that I was really disconnected from the grief that they were feeling. So of all the things in my life, like, that's my biggest regret, that I wasn't there emotionally for them at that time. And they suffered and dealt with that on their own. And about 2 weeks after he'd passed, I remember sitting with a really good friend of mine and saying how angry I was. And, her going, well, of course, anger is one of the stages of grief. And I was like, I'm not angry he took his life. And she's kind of looking at me, because I could understand why he had taken his life. I said, I'm not mad he took his life. I'm mad he did it first. Because being the one left behind, as I thought, you see all the repercussions of it. You see the pain, the heartache, everything people have to go through when someone they love does that. So I desperately wanted to die. How do I do that to the people that I love?
Right.
And it was such an internal pull of wanting to not be here anymore, not hurt, be tired. I was so tired of being in pain. And I mean, and I wasn't just, emotionally, I had developed fibromyalgia, which is, a trauma-based, autoimmune disease, right? So I was physically in pain on top of emotionally in pain. So I didn't want to be in pain anymore. And, of course, I did what I always did. I just, put my head down, pretended that everything was okay. And this worked for a little while. I had received a letter. I received a life insurance policy from his death, from his place of work. So I had some guilt over that, that I was receiving this money and able to, pay off bills and, possibly buy a house and create a life for my kids. And, I remember one bad evening, because every day I can feel, I'm getting more and more exhausted from trying to keep what I felt the darkness at bay. And it's like sitting at night on your back deck when you can just slowly see the darkness creeping in. That's how I felt. And, one bad evening, I'm sitting in my bathroom and I've got a gun cabinet key in one hand and pills in the other hand. And I'm contemplating which way is the best way to end it, because at that point I was done.
You're done.
And thinking about my son again, my children were always, my saving grace, thinking about my son and down in his room, he would be the one that would find me again. And I went back to my old ways. I grabbed a knife and I cut myself. And as I'm sitting there on the floor, watching this blood pool around me, thinking, okay, Charlene, this is a defining moment. We either need to get help or we're going to end our life. So next morning I called mental health services and I got in to see a psychiatrist. And I thought, okay, this is great. This is going to be it for us. And about my third appointment in, I'm getting extremely frustrated, because my personality, of course, is, look, I know why I'm messed up. I've had like 40 some years of realizing why I'm messed up. I need you to tell me how to fix it. Just tell me what to do. This.
Right.
And I remember looking at her going, look, I don't want to talk about the past. Just tell me, how did you get better? Like, how did you deal with your mental health struggles? What did you do? And watching her eyes kind of glaze over, because she went, well, Charlene, I've never dealt with mental health struggles. And having this moment of, wait a minute, like, then how can you sit there in your chair like you have for the last 3 appointments and tell me you understand how I feel?
Exactly.
You don't understand how I feel unless you've been there, unless you've sat in the dark.
Thank you.
You
don't get it.
No, you can't read. You can't understand after reading it out of a book.
Thank you.
I mean, you can logically understand, but you can't emotionally understand what it's like.
Right.
So I think at that moment I checked out. I was just like, you know what? I can't even get help when I'm trying to get help. And so I walked out of that appointment and I set a date to end my life. I had bought a house, so I was just in the processes of moving in. I moved in at the end of September, and I set a date the following end of the next month to end my life. I thought, I'm going to give myself 30 days to get everything as set up and organized for my son, who is still living at home. I just wanted to leave it in the best possible way for everyone involved.
Right.
Because again, I didn't want to be a burden, because that was my whole thing. Don't be a burden on anybody. And about 2 weeks before the date that I had set, I had a girl that I worked with come up to me and said, "Hey, there's this women's workshop in the next town over." And she's like, "Do you want to come with me?" And I was like, "Oh, no, I'm good. Thanks." Right. That was the last thing I wanted to do. And she's like, "Please, I really want to go, but I don't want to go alone." And I was like, oh man, like there's my kryptonite. Always caring about other people's, health and well-being far more than my own. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll go with you. Cause I'm thinking this girl really needs to go. She needs confidence. She's a pretty girl, but I'm probably projecting myself onto her at the moment.
Right.
And so I pulled up to that workshop that Saturday morning. Now this is 2 days before the date I've set to end my life. And when I pull up, I have my hunting rifle in the back seat of my vehicle. I've got, the bullets are there. I'm ready to just, because I don't want anybody see me taking it out of the house. I've snuck it out. And I walk into that room and I immediately feel sick to my stomach, because I'm looking at all these women who, through my eyes, have it all together. They're well dressed. They're excited to be there. They're, in groups of, with friends. And I was very,
Felt out of place.
yeah, I felt extreme. I felt like, there would have been a spotlight shining on me that was like, hey, this person doesn't belong here. Right. And I felt like this just highlighted to me how I didn't belong in this world. I'm walking to my seat and I'm listening to ladies plan, they're talking about vision boards and setting goals. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my goal is just to get through 2 days so I can end my life. And the first half of the day, I was just, like, oh my gosh, really? It's, diet and exercise and financial well-being. And I'm like, none of this applies to me. And then the afternoon session starts, and a woman takes the stage, and she's bald and she has alopecia.
Mm-hmm.
And she's talking about how she struggled as a child and as an adolescent and as a young woman with her own self-love and feelings of self-worth.
Right.
And she talked about how much her life changed when she learned that if she just learned to love herself, everything would be different.
Mm-hmm.
And how much her life had changed when she embraced that concept. So as I'm sitting there, I kind of can hear a voice in the back of my head that says, "What about you?" And I thought, yeah, what about me? Like, how different would life have been had I learned to love myself? Had I stopped needing validation from everyone else in my world to say I was worthy?
Right.
Like trying to find the people that would, replace my parents and say that I was good enough, or my grandfather or whatever. But I just kind of brushed it off because, my decision was made. And the next speaker gets up, and she started talking about living with mental health struggles and being depressed and suicidal for 2 decades, and how she learned that instead of fighting her mental illness and trying to push it away and keep it at bay, that if she embraced it and accepted it as being a part of her, that she could pull the darkness in so that the light could shine into it. And again, I'm sitting there going, wow, like, yeah, how different, I hear that voice. What about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, like, what if I could learn to live with my mental health? What if I could have learned to, instead of fighting it, I could accept it as being part of me and learn to live with it. I always thought it's like the mother-in-law that you don't really want to have, you're stuck with it. So you got to make the best of the situation. Right. And again, I just brushed it off. And then the last speaker of the day came up on stage, and it was a gentleman that talked about having a broken marriage, losing custody of his kids, being an alcoholic, being suicidal, and spending a whole year trying to find a mix of painkillers and alcohol so that he could commit suicide, but make it look like an accidental overdose, because he sold life insurance and he knew how it had to play out. And he talked about how one evening his ex-wife asked if he would watch the kids overnight. And of course he jumped at the opportunity. And it was on that night that he found that perfect mix. And he was laying on his couch, overdosing as his kids are sleeping in the next room. And he's laying there dying, and he hears a voice that says, no, not like this, not today, there's more. And he got to his cell phone, was able to call help, got to the hospital, and it sent him on the road to getting his life together. He got clean and sober, he got into therapy, and now he was going around sharing his stories in hopes that his story would touch someone and help someone. And I'm sitting in that chair at this point going, what is going on right now?
Right.
Like, I'm looking around for a hidden camera that no one knows what's going on in my life, but I'm sitting here going like, I've just heard 3 people talk about the 3 areas of my life that I have been struggling the most in.
Right.
And I'm at an event that I didn't even want to come to. Like, this can't be an accident. I'm sitting here. And I was like, I was supposed to be here and I was supposed to hear these messages for a reason. And obviously that reason is because I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be alive.
With 48 hours left.
With 48 hours left.
Oh,
You
man.
know? And I made a decision. It was like a light switch went off and I was sitting in that chair and I went, no, I want to live. And I thought, like, if these people sharing their stories can touch me and heal me, maybe I can take everything crappy that's happened to me and I can help someone else. And, I went up to the lady that hosted the event and I said, I would really like to sit down with you and just tell you what this event meant to me, because to me, it was really important that she knew that that event had saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down with her and told her, and of course she was, quite shocked. And, because again, I had this persona of everybody, like no one really knew what was going on because I had mastered that mask, and again, I had set myself up with this persona of being this rough, tough, hard ass person, like
Right.
covered in tattoos, as we were talking about. And, to just keep people away. It was kind of a protective, thing. So to be vulnerable was not my normal plan. Right. So, and I remember saying to her, it's like, I would love to come back next year and share my story so people understand the impact these events can have. And she was like, absolutely. So I left that workshop and it just set me on a path for everything to start changing in my life. And I went back the next year and I spoke at her event. And I remember saying before I got off stage that my goal in sharing my story is always just to reach that one person that needs to hear it, because there's always one person that needs to hear it. And I just want people to know that you're not alone and that, I understand you. I hear you. I see you, whatever you're experiencing. And if by sharing my story, I can save one person's life, then everything I've gone through has been worth it.
We're so much alike. That's my message. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I got off the stage and I was trying to beeline my way out of the room because I was, felt sick to my stomach from standing on stage. And this woman stopped me who had been in the audience and she said, hey, Charlene, you know how you said you wanted to save a life? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, I just want you to know you did. And she turned and walked away.
Oh,
and I was standing there in that moment. Yeah. I tell this story multiple times per day and I get goosebumps every time when I say that. And I'm standing there in like total utter shock, right, and quiet. And I hear that little voice in the back of my head that I've come to know and love. And it just said, okay, now let's go find one more. So for me, every day is about finding that one more. It's just sharing my story so that I can reach that one person. And that's why I'm here talking to you.
I cannot get over your strength. You come over so much. It's amazing. I have a couple of questions if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Did your grandmother know what was going on with your grandfather? I'm trying not to cry. I'm like sitting here trying not to cry because you have such strength and you kept going and fighting and you were doing, and I've heard, Charlene, so many different things than what you had to experience as a child, like how you were different as a parent. You did fight for your kids. You need to know that. You need to hear that. Because you did. And you had said, oh, I'm repeating the cycle just like my mom, but you didn't, because you fought for your kids. So good for you, because that's not the same cycle. It was just so inspiring, because like my heart broke a little when you're like, I'm repeating the cycle my mom did. I'm like, no, she got them, and And that's why I want to make sure you do hear
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
because that's amazing, and my hat's off to you. Did your grandfather, did your grandmother, apologies, did your grandmother know what was going on with your grandfather?
That's a debated topic in my family.
Okay.
Um, I don't know 100% whether or not my grandmother knew. I think that there's a good chance that my grandmother suspected that something was going on. And
But not at that level.
just to add to the whole trauma cycle of my family, I will say, after the abuse came out, I found out that my mother had in fact been molested and raped by her dad, my grandfather. So I had a lot of anger towards my mom for the fact that she let us go live there, knowing that he was a predator.
Right.
You
Did
know,
anything happen to your grandfather? Did he ever get
he was
justice
a
for his actions?
well, I don't know if he would call it justice. He was arrested and he did spend, I believe it was around 6 months in jail. And of course, because of his age, they felt that, to put him in there too much longer would probably be a death sentence for him. But, as a child, you're like, well, I've got to live with this for life. He should
Right.
be in there for life, but
Right.
that's not the way our legal system works. It
No, ma'am,
definitely
it's
does
not.
not to serve the victims or justice. So
No.
whether my grandmother knew, don't, I don't 100% know.
Yes.
So,
How about your relationship with your sister now?
my relationship with my sister, that's a great question because no one has ever asked me that. Um,
Yes.
um, oh geez, look at me, I'm getting choked up. My relationship with my sister is okay.
Yeah.
I would say it's strained, and it's more because she has really struggled in her life. Not that I didn't struggle. I
I
definitely
was gonna
struggled,
say
but
you've definitely.
yeah, but I think I've done a lot of the work to get the growth that I've gotten now. And I don't think she's necessarily done as much of the work.
That
I
you.
know she has a lot of guilt
Mhm.
that she carries for not being able to do more. And I've tried to take that away from her and say, that's not your burden to bear. We did the best we could. We were just kids, right? So
Right.
I think I feel sympathy for what she's had to go through. I think, she definitely had the worst of the abuse and the worst of bearing that burden of guilt for not doing more as a sister. So I know and it's funny because we live in the same town. So but it's definitely a work, that relationship's a work in progress for sure.
And what is about your relationship with your kids now? How's that?
That's a work in progress as well. COVID, for me doing my speaking and really like my growth has taken place in the last 5 years. Because that workshop that I attended that saved my life was in 2016. So it
I was
has
about
just
to
been,
ask you that.
yeah. So it's been the last 6 years of my life have been just a monumental shift for me. And of course, so not being able to really sit down, especially since COVID happened, and have conversations with my daughters. I'm always sharing, hey, you should check out this podcast just so they can hear a little bit of the story. But I was lucky enough to have my oldest daughter who she's had her own mental health struggles as well. Actually, both my daughters have. My last workshop that I did, which I held virtually, I was able to have her come in and do the Sunday morning meditation session because she does meditations and stuff. So I was able to have her come in and do the meditation that morning. And I remember she messaged me at the end of the day on Sunday. And she just said, hey, Mom, I just wanted to let you know how proud I am of you. And of
That meant the
any
world
message
out.
I've ever received, and that's, I try not to cry on that one, but of any message that I've received, that's probably the most valuable one that I've received. So.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you. I wanted to ask your take on it because I hold such a strong stance, Charlene, about the fact that when things like this happen, all of it is turned on us as the victims. They leave the predators and the abusers to the side, and it's up to us to prove it. And then it's a he
Mhm.
said, she said, what'd you do to make him mad? And why didn't you just do what he wanted? Well, the only thing we have is our truth,
Yeah.
and then the laws do not protect us. They don't. And I wish we could find a way to start making that change, because
Mhm.
we're never going to get this under control if we don't do something about it. And we're strong.
Mhm.
You are so strong, because look what you've overcome. And you're beautiful. For those who cannot see the video and you're just listening to this podcast, this woman has such a light about her, and she's just an inspiration. She's beautiful. She's so just charismatic when she's talking, and you can see the different emotions in your face. And when you were talking about being held accountable, I could see the disappointment and the anger about the fact that this is all he got. My ex, this is all about you, didn't get a thing. And I've had over 100
Mhm.
surgeries to fix what mine did to me. And it's mind blowing that they get away with this.
Mhm. Yeah,
And it's always just interrogating us. We got interrogated. I got interrogated by law enforcement. And he got kind of, and that's not okay.
yeah, but I mean, the only way that we can change the system is by doing what we're doing, right?
Right.
Keep shining the light onto what happens, keep telling our stories, because the more, stories you tell, more truths that you tell, not stories, more truths that you tell, the more we connect to the people that are experiencing it, and the more they will stand up, and the more people stand up and say, no, this is enough. Then that's when the change happens. It has to, I always say it's a grassroots effort, and it's us in the trenches that are fighting the battles that have to create the change. So that's all
Absolutely.
we can do, is just keep sharing our truths. So
Absolutely. Can I invite you to become a member of our family? We have a Facebook group, a Contagious Smile support group, so that our family members can reach out to you as well. When I put this out there, I want to promote you everywhere. Can you tell everybody how to find you, how to look for you? Where are you?
I'm on social media, of course. You
Of
can
course.
find me on Facebook, Charlene Ann Madden, speaker, and Charlene Ann Madden. Charlene underscore Ann underscore Madden. I always say that because I'm old and I don't know the social media tags, but on Instagram, everywhere. LinkedIn, you can find me, Madden author, because I went and published that book after that workshop, that all that poetry that I had written as a young girl to deal with my pain. I decided that I was going to publish that,
Where
just
can we
to
find that?
on my website, because
Okay.
I published it before I knew anything about Amazon. So it's available on my website. And so you can go to, I have two websites actually, www.charlenemadden-speaker.com,
Okay.
and also www.ascensionwellnessstudio.com. So the Ascension Wellness Studio is where I book all of my coaching clients through and all that. So, and I love when people reach out and just touch base and say, hey, I heard your podcast. And I love to know and hear from the people who it's touched. So
Yes. And I'd also love to talk to you about maybe doing some kind of coaching or mentoring during a summer camp we're doing for the victims, the families, and special needs, because abuse is very high in special needs family as well. So, I would love to talk to you about that later on. But if you
awesome.
will send me an email with all of your correct links so that it may make sure everybody gets it right. Some people don't have the gift of spelling. That would be me.
Yeah.
That I can make sure that I link everything so we can find you. I'll send you an invite to our group and you can become a member of our family and people can reach out to you there. This is an amazing woman, everybody. And I'm so honored to have had you here with us today, Charlene.
Can I leave with one thing?
Absolutely. I was going to ask you if you had anything else you
Yeah.
wanted to leave
Yeah.
with.
I always like to relay this message when I'm on a podcast. And that is, if you're feeling lost and alone and you feel like you don't have anyone that you can talk to, anyone that understands what you're experiencing, I just want you to know, please reach out to me on social media, message me on Facebook, and I will come sit virtually with you in the dark as long as you need me to, and I will hold space for you. And because I know what it feels like to feel all alone. And I don't want anyone to ever spend a moment feeling that way. So please, if you need support, please reach out.
And I'm telling you, she means it. You can see it in her face. She absolutely means it. You're one of those few that actually would follow through and do that. She's just an amazing people. I'm so inspired by you. I am so proud of everything you've accomplished. You are not just a survivor, you're a conqueror. You really are.
Thank you.
You are
Thank you.
so welcome. And I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
And thank you for your platform, and thank you for the healing that you're creating in so many lives. You're creating ripples that you have no idea how far they're reaching. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you,
Gotcha.
Charlene.